Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Friday Focus. It's, for me, an exciting episode in a number of ways. Now, just recently we had our 50th episode, and this is our 2-year threshold today. We've been podcasting for 2 years now. The guests have blown away me in terms of who's been wanting to come and talk and share their experiences and their perspective on this brilliant profession and all that it brings to us. So 2 years we've been doing this, and we intend to keep going. We've got guests lined up almost to Christmas already, and a number of people that are speaking to the education world and really making a difference and bringing a lifetime of experience to this journey. So thank you for being here. Thank you for joining the conversation. So those of you that are listening on LinkedIn or on YouTube or Spotify or Substack, the audiences are growing, and we really appreciate your input. So please, this is a recorded episode, so there won't be live messaging on the screen, but please, we just do the like, follow, subscribe, get involved in the conversation. Please do leave your comments, because we will answer them, and guests, my guest today, are already getting involved in the conversation and joining, getting a perspective on this profession that we love. So to my guest, so today I met Professor Dr. Gross at it was actually a BISA event talking about the future of education. Having been around the profession for a long time, I've known his input and valued it immensely. Certainly through the Education Action Zones, where I taught for quite a number of years. But I'm really excited to bring Ger to this conversation. Good morning, Ger, and thank you for being here to join the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Look, we normally start this conversation with tell us your journey to this point. Now, both of us have been around this job for a long time, so it's not the whole conversation, but just in just sort of picture your journey from where you began to where you are now.
Oh, blimey! So it's as quick as I can in a kind of in a Benjamin Button kind of way. So grew up in the south of the Netherlands in a coal mining area. Was the first in the family to go to university. When I graduated, I wanted to become a teacher. Or maybe we'll come on to that later when we get to talk about role models and etc. Wanted to become a teacher, qualified, no jobs in the Netherlands. Maastricht Library, Times Educational Supplement, 1 year only, teacher of German, Norwich, ring the head teacher. So I did. And so I ended up in Norwich, and it's now, I must be entering the Guinness Book of Records, because 1 year is now, I think it's 45 now. And because you know what happens, you're there, you stay, you like it, promotion, blah. So I was a secondary trained teacher, and I suppose the near end of my journey is that I am now an advisor for the Fondazione Reggio Children in Reggio Emilia, which is an organization that is world leading on early years education. So my journey has been from, it depends how you look at your journeys, isn't it? So it kind of went from teacher to head of department, head of faculty, to advisor, inspector, senior inspector, director, set up the Children's University, was privileged before that to be, you referenced Education Action Zones. I was the director of the 2 Education Action Zones in South Manchester, in Wythenshawe, currently also known as Marcus Rashford Land, I think, and then set up, essentially left the system, because by that time, around the turn of the century, 2007, the system was so overtaking the need of the children that the accountability very clearly had shifted from serving the youngsters to serving the Department for Education and Skills in Ofsted. And I just didn't want to know, the kind of youngsters that I'd been dealing with, which is another track of a career. I started off in Norwich in relative affluence, I suppose, middle class you would call it.
Mm.
And I moved to Hull to what was then known as the Bransholme Estate, which was very tough. I moved to Wythenshawe and South Manchester, which was equally tough. And so I kind of developed this fascination with equity.
Yeah.
Then set up the Children's University with the support of a good number of people. Set up the Children's University, which was about learning outside the classroom, and was particularly focused on 5 to 14-year-olds, and was around experience. Because that issue started to vex me about when you talk to children, you ask them the question, why do they go to school? The answer is because you make me, and it just didn't seem like a good answer.
Yeah.
So I did at Children's University, that beyond expectation went international. I met a very good friend of mine, Joel Cadbury, who then acquired the license for something called Kidzania, which was a business that was about careers education for age 14, but experienced and lived. And I did some work with them in London, and then their global office rang me from Mexico City at high altitude. It seems to be the next sentence due to the World Cup at the moment. And they asked me to become their first global education director. So, and then from that we did research and whatever. But the important bit, I suppose, going back to that first journey, the Benjamin Button one, was that wherever we encountered, or we encountered issues, the answer always was earlier. Yeah. So when you actually looked at, well, why are 16-year-olds from deprived areas not doing as well as we might want them to? The answer was not the there and then and blaming the teachers and the schools, but the answer was wider and earlier. Yeah. So almost like, I don't know, almost like Poirot, I suppose, you begin to look, right? And you end up in the early years sector. Yeah. And so that's the going back bit. Yeah. And you end up into experience-based learning as opposed to slavishly following a national curriculum that is being taught.
Yes.
So that's kind of where I ended up, and sometimes I still don't know quite where I am because things kind of so I look at the recent Milburn report, for example, which has to be welcomed. Yes. But I also then get annoyed about how narrow it is, because you kind of think, why are you talking about 14-year-olds? Why are you not talking about 4-year-olds? Why do we have to cut up the cake horizontally and vertically, and why can't we just focus on the youngsters? So that's where the drive still is. I'm not sure, Chris, whether that answered any of your questions.
No, well, I didn't ask a question. I just gave you the opportunity. And this is the thing that I'm going to say, I'm starstruck, kind of that. I so admired what you said when I was listening to you, because I hear the same things that I find. In fact, I have literally just come out of a conversation with the chief executive and heads of a set of schools. And I've just been saying exactly what you've just been saying, why we need to be looking earlier. Why? And I guess I kind of lead into my first question. You say in your book that schooling and education are different things. And what's the difference? Because I think what you've just described, in a sense, is kind of leading into that. We've got this mindset about schooling. And I'm not going to steal your thunder. Just expand on that a little. The difference between schooling and education.
I think there are a number of things in this, and what we do, and maybe we come to systems later on and why we do it. We cut up the cake, right? So if I look at my youngest daughter, who is nearly 21, she's just finished her second year at university. She's had more Secretary of States for Education and more Prime Ministers than I've had hot dinners recently, right? Yeah. Yep. So, and everybody wants their own little slice. So we're kind of programmed into systemic thinking. 5-year parliaments, if we're lucky, right? 5-year Secretary of States for Education. They want this, they want this, they want this. The accountability is to Ofsted and the Department for Education. And we are increasingly moving away from why children go to school. And it takes me back to my dear friend, the late Ken Robinson, who I was very fortunate to spend many a good time with, and we often talked about that thing that Ken referenced so brilliantly, which was about schooling originally was there to serve the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
Right. So essentially, what we need all of a sudden, oh my God, we need lots of people who should be able to do this, and we haven't got any.
Yeah.
So how do we do that bit, right? And it's the bit it always makes me smile, and I mention it in the book. It's the Billy Connolly reference, which goes very nicely along Ken's, really, which was Billy Connolly says, I went to school, I watched pigeons screwing on the roof. I had no idea why I was there. And then all of a sudden, at the age of 14, the gates of the school opened, and the gates of the shipyard on the Clyde opened, and most of us just streamed from one end to the other. I incidentally, says Billy Connolly, joined the wrong queue and I became a welder. But that was more or less what it was like. And when I grew up in the south of the Netherlands, it was the same, except we didn't go into the shipyards. Most of my contemporaries went into the coal mines.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So there was a purpose to schooling that I suppose, even in those days, was about feeding the economy. I have a restricted period of time in which I have a goal to achieve. And here we are. I can tick that systemic box because we've got, in Billy Connolly's words, we've now got 80,000 welders or whatever we need. Right?
Yeah.
So, but education is about, look, and this is where the early years comes in. I have this brilliant little video that I sometimes use, which is about a little toddler trying to sit down in a toddler chair. And she backs onto it very carefully and keeps looking around. And in the end, after about 2 minutes, the toddler actually sits down, backing onto the chair, looking immensely proud of the achievement. That's education, right? I have a picture of a then 3-year-old girl called Becca, who went to the Kelvin Grove a museum in Glasgow, where she copied a portrait of Anna Pavlova dancing as a 3-year-old. Her mum sent me that picture when I was in the Children's University. That is education. Much further down the line, we call it, because we have to box things in, we call it lifelong learning. Actually, lifelong learning is education.
Yes.
And the beauty about education is it doesn't do this.
Yeah.
It allows us to do this.
It's not
so,
yeah.
And this is where the experiential learning piece comes in, because it kind of says, I'll show you why you should go to school.
Yeah.
You should go to school because good schooling will enable you to educate yourself better for longer. Yeah. So look at education as my dear friend, the former president of the Fondazione Reggio Children, Carla Rinaldi, used to say, education is 0 to 99, or in the case of David Attenborough, 0 to 100, right? And schooling is, depending on where you live on the planet, somewhere around the 10 or maybe 15 years. And the beauty about good schooling is it equips us better. Now, there's an interesting thing there, Chris, because when you then look at a very English thing about what is good schooling, and that is an episode on its own, I would suggest. But what is good schooling? Good schooling in our broad societal definition is what goes on in the best independent schools. Now, you and I could talk about that for a long time, but there's a perception around that.
Yeah.
What do the best independent schools offer? They offer a very broad, very balanced, very experience-based, and very purposeful curriculum.
Yes.
What do the state schools offer? They offer a very narrow, very focused, very limited curriculum that is not learned but taught.
Yes.
And
the product of that is Alan Milburn saying we're not educating learners for a life of working in a future of growth. And
the product of that also is, if you look at the Billy Connolly or Ken Robinson stories, the product also is very bluntly and stereotypically put, is that the poor kids become the welders, and the ones that do go to the private schools are the ones who run the shipyard.
Yeah.
Now, if as a society we think that's what we want and we vote for that,
I think your dog agrees.
I think the dog agrees. I think the postman's probably around there, about to arrive next door. If that's what we vote for, but I don't think that's what we want.
No.
Now, I then take, I mean, you're then into accountability and responsibility. Who is responsible for the education of a child? And in my wife's school, her mantra is, every child is everyone's responsibility. Who is responsible for the schooling of a child? The professionals that operate in that school. And I think some of that then needs unpicking. But I think the recognition that education is a much bigger job than schooling, and that education has many more people who are responsible. And the sad thing often is that the dialogue between those who school and the dialogue between those who educate is often non-existent.
Yeah.
And as schools, we need to think about, I've kind of advocated in a number of primary schools now that I do some work with, what I call family homework.
Yeah.
Right. So, for example, we've just off the top of my head, we've been talking about climate change in school, and we've done this as part of science. Yeah.
Yep.
Now, can mum and dad then please, with the youngster, watch half an hour of David Attenborough at home? And the evidence of that is a selfie that is being sent to the teacher. So the homework is not complete unless it's done together.
Yes.
We need to, that thing about it takes a village to raise a child, or kind of translated into education, is an impact partnership. We need to look at a wider base to educate our children. And a really good example is my youngest one. She's studying Spanish and Italian at Oxford. She's at the end of her second year. She's about to do her year abroad, and she is now all of a sudden, partly for very personal circumstances, she has developed an interest in medicine. Her interest in medicine came because I'm, after 18 months, still coming out of a cancer journey, and she's seen these amazing people in the NHS around me.
Yes.
So the interesting thing was that the guys at the NHS said to me, would I speak at one of their conferences from the patient perspective, which of course I happily did because I owe these people so much. And then I had to contact my consultant saying, my daughter now wants to be like you. Can she shadow you for a bit, right? Now the beauty is she could have read 1,500 books.
Yep.
Right? 1 week with Mr. Patel educates her better to make a schooling choice than 1,500 books. And this is where this it takes a village to raise a child bit becomes so important. My point still would be is that we shouldn't be doing that with 21-year-olds. We should be doing that with 4-year-olds.
And you speak to so much. I mean, the things that I've talked about so much. So that concentration on the child's lived experience. So how many leaders, not just are we compliant and we're doing all the things that we're told we must do, but do you take the trouble to think about how the child experiences this and what they're getting from it? And so many of the reports I hear of, no, you're making me and I don't want to. And the attendance stuff that's going on, you're telling me I've got to be here. And when I get here, you tell me off because I'm not here enough. Yeah. And what you're doing is just reinforcing that. So give them incentive, make the experience. So it's that, and that's, I know I've spoken to educators that are professionals in schooling, and ask them the question. So what was the most impactful thing in your schooling? It's got nothing to do with the classroom. They talk about visits, they talk about theatre, they talk about the kind of ancillary things to what their profession is leading them to. So it is so much of that bigger picture of what is the child's experience and how they're engaging.
But there's an interesting thing in that, Chris, around relationships though as well, which is that, as Carla Rinaldi always used to say, of the youngest of children, we we as adults need to trust the children as much as they trust us, right? So when I think of even the Billy Connolly and Ken Robinson model, when I think of schooling being there to ready children for the world of work, it doesn't do it at all.
No.
We've got schools, Chris, we've got secondary schools where they're not allowed to speak on the corridors. I've never been in a place of work. I've never been in a place of work where I wasn't allowed to speak on the corridors. And I've never been in a place of work where at the end of my lunchtime, somebody stood with a megaphone shouting me to come back in. Right. So I think we really need to rethink that whole thing, which is very difficult within the bullying environment of Ofsted, particularly Ofsted and DFE that we're in, because our accountability, if our accountability were, I said to you, Chris Jones, you've got 1,500 children in your school, I'm going to measure how well you've done by each child, in the not just by test, but in the broadest possible sense. That's a very different accountability to me saying to you, Chris Jones, here's my tick list. Oh my goodness, you've ticked them all. Go and buy yourself an outstanding banner or exceptional or whatever it is these days.
Yeah.
So I think we need that rethink, right?
We do, and I know. I mean, you and I, we've been around the profession for a long time in different experiences. But the thing that in fact, even just yesterday, an ex-pupil who's now in his 50s came back to me, and I've been helping him in a circumstance that he's going through. But the fact that was part of, so he knows that he can come and ask a question. We're adults now, and we can share that lived experience. But it's that relationship, that level of trust, and for me, that's been a lifetime of people that will, even now they say, sir, can you just, and I don't want to be sir, I'm Chris, just talk, but talk to me about what it is, because we're still learning and we're still going through that process.
Totally.
Can I just pause for a second, and we've got to do the element. So if you're listening, if there's anything you want to ask, if there's a process that you're going through in your organization that you want to get involved, please do follow and subscribe to the various channels wherever you are. We will get to answer those questions, but we're on LinkedIn. 28,000 people there are following what we're doing, so please do get involved in the conversation, and we will follow that through. My team get involved in that daily. So we're also on YouTube, building a kind of body there, Substack and Spotify, different forms, different media, but please do like, share and subscribe. It does grow this conversation. I think we're at an inflection point in the education journey where around the world people are reconsidering what, as Ger has just talked about, what schooling is and how it differs from the kind of high ideals of education. So please, if you want to get involved in the conversation, please do, and share, like and subscribe. That would be greatly appreciated. So Ger, just thinking about, in your book, you talk about this, the children can't aspire to what they don't know exists, or you put it positively. Just to take us into that a little bit further.
Can I suggest, Chris, that we watch a 2-minute video first, just to set the scene and the status quo, and then I'll explain where the phrase came from, actually.
Yes. So here we go.
Training fleas requires a glass jar with a lid. The fleas are placed inside the jar, and the lid is then sealed. They are left undisturbed for 3 days. Then, when the jar is opened, the fleas will not jump out. In fact, the fleas will never jump higher than the level set by the lid. Their behaviour is now set for the rest of their lives. And, when these fleas reproduce, their offspring will automatically follow their example.
And that's where we're at. So that's the status quo. So if you come from, I mentioned earlier, if you come from any disadvantaged area in the country, there is a very high probability that you as a parent and as a community don't go above the lid, and that as a consequence, neither will your children. So the biggest challenge is equity and inclusion, and the recognition, incidentally, that all of us at some point will have felt, at least, and probably have been excluded. Yeah? So there is no shame to this. The issue becomes is to recognize it and how we then do this, and the role that experience-based learning plays in this. So when I was the director of the 2 education action zones in Wythenshawe and South Manchester, our main, between 1999 and 2007, our main sponsor, in inverted commas, was Manchester Airport PLC. And I was very lucky that the then chief executive of Manchester Airport, a wonderful man called Jeff Muirhead, was the chairman of the Education Action Zone. Jeff was just brilliant. He completely got it all. And one of the issues that Manchester Airport had, which was very interesting, was it could not recruit enough people from within its local community. So as Jeff sometimes used to say to me, our car parks are full of the people who are traveling from Chester and Liverpool to come and work at Manchester Airport. Why can't we get the people from Wythenshawe to jump on a bus? So he deeply cared personally, but also from an airport point of view about local employability. So quite early on, I went into a large number of schools and started talking to primary age children and asked them the question, tell me the jobs you can do at the airport. And the answer I got were the things they could see. Yeah. Selling newspapers and WH Smiths, passport control, baggage handling, driving the buses, check-in desks, all those things. Only 45% of all the jobs in an airport are visible. Yeah. Air traffic control is not visible, for example. Yeah. Yeah. So I went back to the airport and said, this is partly your fault. 55% of it you can't recruit because you don't tell people what's here. Yeah. Yeah. Right? But at the same time, I'm sitting down with these youngsters and said at some point, look, there's the plane, pilot. You could become a pilot. And the answer I got from 7, 8, 9-year-olds was, not just one, but loads of them, and from their parents, was people from Wythenshawe don't fly planes. So it wasn't just about this. From an experience point of view, it was also, there was a very firm lid on. So our task in the education action zones, in partnership, this kind of impact partnership at Manchester Airport and the 250 companies within it, was we need to start to do this, experiences. So we built classrooms in Terminal 2, we had pilots drop in at the end of a flight, we had all sorts of experiences going on for the youngsters. So one, we broadened the experiences. And the second thing is we worked with the families and said, and we started to find examples of youngsters who had made it through. Yeah. Marcus Rashford in his own right. Yep. Yeah. As the kids in Wythenshawe say, I saw his old school on the news this morning, and there was one of the little boys who was playing football saying, he is one of ours. Yeah. And the minute you create that as an education experience, your schooling becomes much more purposeful. And incidentally, children can only aspire to what they know exists. It applies to their parents and to their grandparents. Yeah. Part of that is a mindset. And part of that is about the capacity and the capability to aspire. Yeah. And there's a very interesting thing, because we then go into aspiration and the politics of London and the politics of the middle classes and the civil servants. Determined that aspiration is something that lives in a dictionary. But I remember being 9 years old, sitting on my granddad's. Now, my granddad was a former coal miner. His lungs were shot. He had arthritis in his hands. And it was one of those memories, it was a blue kitchen chair. There was a brown front door. He was wearing his cap. We had corduroy trousers on. It was sunny. I can close my eyes and still be there. I was 9 years old, and my granddad said, promise me you will always do your best at school. He didn't say, promise me you'll get A star or 9s or whatever they are. And so being 9, I said, why?
Yes.
And his answer was, because I don't want you to have hands like mine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You see, social mobility is about one day at a time.
Yeah.
And it is about role models, and it is about stories, and it isn't about textbooks, and it is about lived experiences. So that mantra that was kind of invented as part of the whole Widenshaw thing, then it's kind of become quite a big thing, and the children can only aspire to what they know exists. And I suppose the one thing it does, Chris, if more than anything, it focuses the attention on the child rather than on the system.
I'm listening to you, and I recognise that the AZ kind of mentality, the things that we did. I won't name him here, but I can think of a child that was in East Basildon in the Education Action Zone that we fought for. We got him, he was a school refuser, wouldn't come in, wouldn't get involved. We engaged him in a radio program. He got an OCN qualification in journalism. I met him in town and he said, "Sir, I've just passed my pilot's license at Luton Airport. I am now going to be flying commercially into Europe." Now, he was a school refuser, and a little group around him, we turned their attendance from 23%, I think they were, to, they were there every day at breakfast briefings doing their journalism, and they made a difference to the town. They did stuff that was, and I know that mindset was there. And we've turned that in smart curriculum into what we call sector analysis. So exactly that. The experiences there, there are 18 sectors that are defined that were in that kind of the world of work. So a goal for every leader is, where are those 18 sectors reflected in your school? So it's not just academics, because you're an academic teaching body, but you're reflecting all of them. So measure it, look at it, and make sure you're providing for it, and then give experiences. Not the doctor, the footballer, the architect, but the technician, the physio, the journalist, the manager. So you've got all of these people engaged in that. So certainly the work that what you're describing, we are trying still to champion. It's not just about academic qualifications. It is about experience, and what's the responsibility to deliver that. And that's why I love this conversation, because it's we can still do it. It's not out there. We have to work within the system, but it is doable.
And it's about personalization, because what did you do for that youngster? You actually recognize that youngster beyond the cohort of 1,500 or 1,000 or 500, whatever it is.
2,500, it was 2,500. Yeah, it's huge.
And you go, I'm going to spend some time with you because I think I know you, and we're going to find a way to make this work for you. Now, in this day and age, even more so, Chris, than 25 years ago, we live in an age of ultra personalization. Whatever the government does with mobile phones in schools and all that, terrible, naive way of thinking. But in the end, we live in an age of ultra personalization. Millions of children have access to the whole world in the palm of the hand.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And what are we doing? We are still doing the Billy Connolly bit. We're still creating 80,000 welders because they're needed somewhere. And at some point, we need to turn it upside down and inside out and start from the youngster. And I remember doing some work with a wonderful guy called Mike Treadaway, who was very senior at Fisher Family Trust. And in Widenshaw, we started to look at effectively an individual pupil level database, whereby we tracked the achievements and the attainments and the attitudes of the youngsters. And it was kind of contextual value added. And that's where we should be going back to, rather than this, oh, it's easy to measure. And the thing about the personalization agenda is, we want all these people for the AI industry and for creating drones and all that stuff that's coming out. But in the end, we need to create the opportunity. So I've been advocating now for quite a while, and I've clumsily called it futures awareness since my Kidzania days, really, which is where I would like to see careers education from the age of 6. But as an awareness, because the minute you say to somebody, what was your career's education like, they either laugh or swear. Right? So I just want to get beyond that bit. So it's all about those experiences. And there's an interesting exercise I did again in the Education Action Zones days. I did with the late, very great Professor Sir Tim Brighouse, where Tim and I used to talk about what 11 experiences do we think an 11-year-old should have had?
Yeah.
Right? And incidentally, this is not about grades.
No.
So we did that thing. We used to have these was in the early days of the whiteboards when we wrote on them with the wrong pens and all that, and people used to get very irate. Do you remember?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
And we used to write down 11 things, and then what we did is we used to leave the rubber next to it and say to people, hope you disagree, but at least debate it with your. And one of the things that I used to put on was teamwork, right? Either being part of a performance or having witnessed one, having been to a library, gallery, museum, or whatever, having visited the capital city of your country. Yeah. I used to put on mine, even in those days, have access to the internet. Nowadays, you would probably I think every 11-year-old should have experience of social media.
Yeah.
Right? Now, people might disagree with this, but can we come to an educational rather than a schooling consensus? How good would it be if through smart curriculum, you could run an ongoing vox pop about what are the 11 experiences at 11, the 14 experiences at 14, and the 16 at 16, or whatever, right?
I'm with you, Charlie. Absolutely.
Open it up to mums, dads, granddads, employers, whoever. Because the interesting thing was, and this, I was a bit cheeky and naughty with this at the time. So one of the things that the wonderful Jeff Muirhead at Manchester Airport used to do for me, every year, he used to invite all the CEOs of all the companies within the airport to a breakfast. And I used to have them for an hour and a half. There's 250 CEOs in a room. I used to walk in and say, these are our achievements from last year. These are our plans for the next year. And this is what I need your help with. Please sign up.
Yep.
Right? Yep. And it was brilliant. It worked. And so what that allowed us to do, it allowed us to personalize the agenda of many of the youngsters that we knew, and that impact partnership then worked around these youngsters, and we could measure. So we created, with the Royal Bank of Scotland at the time in Manchester, a curriculum called the RBS Diploma, which essentially we found as a pilot 25 youngsters who were in year 10, who were bright sparks and turned off.
Yep.
So there were going one or two things was going to happen, is either we turn them back on or they fall off the cliff. Yep. Out of the 25, 24 stayed with us. They did 3 days a week in school, English, maths, computing, as it was called at the time, a modern language, and PE or food. They did 1 day a week at college on life skills, yeah, and then they did 1 day work placement at the RBS, who would then keep them on if they were good. So the 250 CEOs, I then said to them at some point, tomorrow I'm interviewing a 16-year-old. What 3 things are you looking for? Write them down for me. So this was in 2000. So I got 750 answers. So I turned this into a slide, right? And we called them Key Skills for Future Employment was the title of the slide. Slide gets hidden. 24 years later, when I'm tidying on my laptop, I'm coming across this slide. And 2 weeks after that, I'm due to give a keynote somewhere in London. So I'm literally looking at this slide and thinking, if I make that look as if it was constructed in 2024, I'm going to use this again.
Yep.
So I use the slide again 24 years later. And everybody in the room is going, oh my God, can we have a copy of this? Because you know what was on the slide? Good communication.
Yeah.
Now, it didn't say good communication on Instagram. It just said good communication.
Yeah.
Confidence, right? Respect.
Yeah.
So all those points still live. And I think the interesting thing is sometimes within our quest in schooling, I think more than education, we constantly look to reinvent the wheel because from the top down, we're kept so busy that we don't get time to think. And I think that's where organizations like yours become really important to actually, you have the capacity and the capability to press the pause button and go, just hang on a minute.
Yeah.
Let's just look at the youngsters rather than at the systems, because we live in this thing, don't we, where so you have a government and they have decided what children should be taught, not necessarily what they should learn, what they should be taught, right? They call that the national curriculum. Then we make absolutely damn sure through DFE and Ofsted and league tables that you follow what I've told you to follow, because otherwise I call you failing. And you and I could have a conversation around this without mentioning the word child once.
Yes.
We have the account from the outset, our accountability is in the wrong place. And I urge schools, of course, I mean, I'm realistic enough that as much as we like to stick up two fingers to Ofsted sometimes, you know, in the real world, we can't. But there's nothing to stop you and turn around to Ofsted and say, oh, and by the way, these are our profiles on our children. These are our progress charts. And the reason our attendance has gone up so much, by the way, is because children feel part of this, they feel engaged, and they understand why they come to school.
Yeah.
So one of the key findings from Cambridge University about the Children's University was that the more children, remember from disadvantaged background, the more children participate in the Children's University, the better their attendance at school is.
Yeah.
And so people in the DFES or whatever they used to be called at times used to go, what do? Do you teach them maths? Do you teach them English? And we went, no, we just give them responsibility and they understand. All of a sudden, when you visited a newspaper and you talk to a newspaper editor, you understand that learning English has a purpose, right? Yeah. So therefore, they go back to school. So the journey is a longer one rather than this troubleshooting so that politicians can say within 5 years, look what we've achieved.
Yeah.
Child focus is what we need.
And there's so much, I mean, we know, I know when I heard you speaking, there were other guests on the stage, and I thought the one thing that I heard in you is how do we motivate children? We know, you know, if we simplify motivation theory, it's autonomy, mastery, and purpose.
Yeah.
What you've just described is exactly that. Give people autonomy, teach them well so they can do it well, but give them a reason. And that's really what you're saying. That's and that's what we're not doing in our schooling at the moment. We're not giving them autonomy. We're not, well, we might be trying on mastery, but we're certainly not giving them purpose. They don't see the reason. Yeah. So I
think which is really important, because we can't divide these things. We can't split them off. We don't trust our children.
No.
Right? I look at a school. I mean, I think it's a breach of human rights. I look at a school where a child is allowed to go to the toilet once a day, or where the toilets are locked during lesson time, and you kind of think, what kind of tone does that set? And tone matters, right? Now people then say, oh, they might try it on. It's in their job description to try it on.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It was that wonderful quote from The Little Prince, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. All grown-ups were once children, but only few of them remember it, right? Grow up, grown-ups, right? Yes. And so we can't have a system that is that and distrusting, and then go, oh, we love our children, we want to work with them. No, we love them on our terms, and we want to work with them on our terms, but actually be courageous, open it up.
Yeah, that's the seen and not heard kind of.
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah. Just need to pause for 1 second now, and in sort of this conversation, one thing I am going to say, and you will see my tabs on it because I've sort of picked out. So Ger's book, Lessons from a Life in Education, through a different lens. You've probably gathered from the conversation that our perspectives are changing. I am going to say again, please, we've got the book launch for my book, The Perfect Timetable, coming up next Wednesday. So if you're able to join us for the Perfect Timetable, actually we speak a lot about these things, about how we're structuring the way we put schooling together. Please get involved in the conversation there. We'd love to see you next Wednesday, the 8th of July, or at 6 o'clock. We'll be on LinkedIn and we'll be on YouTube. Please do get involved in that conversation. Really appreciate you being there. Gail, we're coming to the last sort of few minutes, so you've kind of we haven't got through all the questions that we've put together, but we've talked our way through them.
Yeah.
I'll come to the last question, but in the sense of what you just said, if we're speaking to leaders, taking that moment to step back, there is a mindset question around what you've been tutored into, what you've been kind of structured. What do you see as kind of the important characteristic in leadership at the moment? How is this going to change? I mean, we've got people like Alan Milburn and maybe even this week in the English system, Andy Burnham and some of the stuff that he's done. What's been called Manchesterism, that's very current. Where do you see the need for leadership to change? I'll open the door to your thoughts.
Well, it's a tricky one, right? Because I completely understand the bullying culture that leaders are part of, or I put that wrongly actually. The bullying culture that is forced upon them, the bullying culture of DFE, the bullying culture of Ofsted, the fear of losing your job in the end.
Right? Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So there are reality. There are very harsh realities in this, but at the same point, we almost all of us entered this broad profession for a reason. The reason being we wanted to do the right thing, and we wanted to do the right thing by young people. I don't for a minute think that there is a head teacher out there who actually at the age of 22 went, the only reason I'm entering this is because I want the word head teacher on the door. I can't believe that, right?
Yeah. No,
so we need to remind ourselves why we entered this. We need to make the time to revision this because time moves on. And we need to have the conviction of our courage and the courage of our conviction. And we need to be subversive in the nicest possible way.
I agree,
right?
absolutely.
But the bit that actually says, I said this to when I did some work in the Middle East a few years ago, where we introduced happiness surveys in school, and the heads went, but it's not on the inspection agenda. And I went, what? Your life is so narrow? Your convictions are now so... Because remember, head teachers leaders can also be put in a jar with a lid on.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So we need to bust the jar and we need to get rid of the lid and actually say, oh, by the way, Mr. and Mrs. Ofsted or whoever you are, this is also what we do. And these are what we call contributory factors to our excellent standards contextually.
Yeah.
Right? And we need to be brave enough to argue our case. The bottom line is, in footballing analogies, what is expected is that Macclesfield Town performs at the same level as Manchester City.
Yeah.
And we just need to go, that just doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
But look what we do. Look how brilliant we are, and look what solutions we can find. And I think perhaps our leaders need to be thinking more, as easily said these things, but need to be thinking more about leadership rather than management, because actually what has happened through Department for Education, through Ofsted, and dare I say it, through the academization agenda, is we are creating more and more managers, doers of what they've been told to do.
Yeah.
And we are creating fewer leaders, people who are prepared to go, yeah, we'll do that bit, but this is more important to our youngsters.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think
that's
and going back to the Milburn report, the points coming out of the Milburn report from the youngest of ages. So I think the Milburn report is about 5-year-olds. Yeah, from the youngest of ages requires the courage of leadership and local context. The outcomes of if the outcomes of the Milburn report are a national policy, we failed. The outcome of the Milburn report needs to be a national framework. You know the books that we buy little children, the colouring in books, right? Where somebody's drawn the picture, but depending on which crayons you've got, you colour it in differently.
Yeah.
That's the outcome of the Milburn report. And we need to have the courage of our conviction. And I would urge leaders to find more leadership time amongst themselves and with other leaders, and to tell their stories more and better. I reference in my book the importance of storytelling. Right? In the end, Chris, all the answers to all our issues are already there. We're just really bad at telling the story so that others can go and sort of that. I'll make that work for me.
On that improvement journey, I know I've said it here several times to various different guests, but a leader a leader, not a manager, said to me sometime, change is coming. If you know what we should have been doing yesterday, you need to be doing it today. Let's not wait for next year or that. Yeah. And the story, the narrative, the clarity of that was already there. Why are we waiting? Let's just get on with it. Let's do it. And that takes a leader to do that.
Yeah.
And so much of what we do is values and purpose driven. So it's smart. That's why it's called smart curriculum, because we need to be smarter about this. And I hear in what you're saying the kind of compliance. Government is built around compliance, and it always will be. But the saddest thing is where we see model lessons where everybody's got to teach the same thing.
The North Korean model of doing things, for want of a better. And I think the other thing is leaders need to listen, and they need to have the courage to listen to everybody and not just to the people who bully them. Yeah.
Well, that's a tough thing in the world, but it can be done. It can be done, and there are leaders out there that are doing it. And the context of this conversation, Gail, we've really framed it around the English system, and there'll be many people that are listening to this from around the world. We know that there are lots of government systems that are really reevaluating and are getting into things that we've talked about. So we're not being really critical. We're just saying this is where we're at. So that's the journey. But look, we're coming to the end. But I would still like to ask you that last question. If you could change one thing, what would it be? And don't worry about the dogs. People can cope with that. It's part of life. This is the experience we're in.
Let me introduce you to Connie and Florence. What I would, we live in a system where the tail is, and not just in England. I think it's everywhere. I think it's particularly bad in England. But if I go to the Middle East and if I go to India and I work in Pakistan and all these places, we live in systems where the tail wags the dog. Now, what one thing would I change? And in the end, because you want change to happen fast, right? Because we can all draw up plans for the next 15 years and this, that, and the other. And I think if you want change fast, there are two things that we need to do with the word. The first thing is with the word professional trust and respect in mind. Yeah. We need to chop the tail off the dog. right? So the bottom line is, whichever way we look at it, and I can come up at this with really friendly ways and collegiate and leadership and many courses and I don't know, jacuzzis and whatever else, right? But
Yep.
in the end, think of Ruth, the head teacher who so sadly passed away. We need to get rid of Ofsted. We need to get rid of an accountability framework that is untrusting, that is disrespectful, and that most certainly does not serve the children. And then people will say, he doesn't want accountability. I want accountability all the time, but I want it to the child developed with the people who have to deliver this. And actually, do you know what? Stick a really good bunch of leaders in a room and they'll come up with a framework that's probably more challenging than the tick box exercise that we're going through at the moment. But in the end, whether we like it or not, and I think it needs to be brutal, we need to chop the tail off the dog. You okay, Chris?
I think we've just lost the signal for a moment. You got to chop the tail off the dog. That's where you. Yeah. I think we lost the signal there. But yeah,
I think after that brutal conclusion, I think, of course, we need to do all the good things. But I see too many people who are bruised. I see too many head teachers who are resigning. I see too many people with wonderful ideas, with lots of energy, wanting to do completely the right thing in different ways, right? Yes. And in the end, Ken Robinson used to say, we teach the creativity out of children. Yeah, and I think we've come to the point where we bully the creativity out of leaders, and that's got to stop.
Yeah. You said two things, so that's one. You blended the other one into that.
Yeah, I think so. I think the thing is about it needs to be about trust. Trust is the most important commodity in improvement, and what we've created over the years is a competitive system.
Yeah,
and by the nature of the beast. So we need to reward trust. I mean, one of the future I suppose accountability criteria needs to be, show me how you purposefully, in the interest of the child, work in partnership with other organizations. Find me little Chris and show me how your way of partnership working, including with other schools, makes Chris better educationally.
Yeah. Well, we know that I mean, all that we know about good learning is that peer activity is the strongest influencer. So that's all about partnership. Ger, I'm just thinking, I'm making in my head connections with all sorts of people. You know, Frank Norris and what he's written about Ofsted recently, and just concurring with what you're saying, and really strong previous guest. So many people, basically saying the same thing. One of the reasons that we have this is why we say join the conversation, because it's actually about that partnership in dialogue. And I know, it is an international question, because there are people around the world that are saying, we've come from this, we don't want to copy it, but we want to draw from what's there and what's been learnt. And we're not in a great place at the moment here in England. There are some good things happening in Wales and Northern Ireland. And one of the bits in your book where you talk about how we measure it, it's not just about performance data. There are so many other things that we could be measuring. I am really sorry we've got to come to the end of the conversation, Gary. It's been an absolute pleasure. And maybe we'll continue the conversation in another one. That'd
be great.
So thank you, Ger. I really appreciate it. Thank you for this morning.
Thank you from me. Thank you from Florence. Thank you from Connie, the postman went. Thank you to Richard. So it's absolutely great, Chris. And I would be delighted to catch up again before too long.
Sure. Stay with me for a second. So I just want to say thank you. If we want to get involved in this conversation, And there are more and more people that are talking about reimagining education, reforming the values. It starts with leaders who've got that vision and that purpose. So if you get involved, if you want to get involved in the conversation, join the Smart Curriculum Network. So like, share and subscribe through any of the channels. But this is about empowering leaders to see and do the exceptional. And there are things that can be done within a compliance measured system. And it's been great to have you here. Please do stay with us, get involved in this conversation, and we will see you again in our next episode. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.